The morning sun glinted off the glass doors of Westbrook Financial as Richard stepped out of his car, handing the keys to the valet. It was going to be a good day. His company, Vision Technologies, had just closed a deal worth millions, and he needed to set up the transfer before their expansion meeting that afternoon. He straightened his tie and checked his watch. 9:15 a.m. Perfect timing. The bank wouldn't be too crowded, and he could get back to the office before his 11 o'clock meeting. As the founder and CEO of a company now valued at over $500 million, Richard had learned to manage his time precisely. The cool air inside Westbrook Financial was a welcome relief from the growing heat outside. Richard had been banking here for 15 years, ever since he started his tech company with just 3 employees working out of his garage. Now with offices in 3 cities and over 300 staff, Vision Technologies had become a respected name in software development. Richard nodded politely at the security guard and made his way toward the premium banking section. He'd been here countless times, usually met with smiles and immediate service. Today, however, something felt different. The young woman at the reception desk barely looked up as he approached. "Good morning," Richard said, placing his premium client card on the counter. "I need to arrange a business transfer." The receptionist glanced at the card, then at Richard. Her eyes lingered a moment too long on his face, a flicker of something doubt, perhaps crossing her features before she picked up the phone. "One moment, please," she said, her voice noticeably cooler than the greeting he'd overheard her give to the elderly white couple who had entered just before him. Richard waited patiently. After 15 years of building a tech company as a black man in America, he'd developed an extra sense for these moments. The slight shifts in tone, the subtle changes in body language that signaled he was being judged differently, but he'd also learned that success was the best response. 5 minutes passed. The elderly couple had already been escorted to a private room. Richard checked his watch again. 9:25 a.m. The bank manager's office was clearly visible from where he stood, and through the glass Richard could see him chatting and laughing with another client. Finally, a man in a charcoal gray suit approached. Not the bank manager Richard knew, but someone new. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his tone suggesting the opposite. "Yes, I have a substantial business transfer to process today," Richard explained. "I've been a premium client here for 15 years. I usually work with Mr. Thomas." "Mr. Thomas is with clients," the man said, glancing at Richard's premium card still on the counter. "Do you have an appointment?" "I've never needed one before," Richard replied calmly. "This is a time-sensitive transaction for my company." The man, whose name badge read William Peterson, assistant manager, picked up Richard's card between 2 fingers as if it might be fake. "And which account would this be for?" Peterson asked. Richard provided his business account number from memory and pulled out his ID. "Vision Technologies. I'm the founder and CEO." Peterson's eyebrows rose slightly, the only acknowledgement that he might be standing before the head of a major tech company. He made no move to check the system. "Mr. Thomas handles all our premium business clients," Peterson said. "You'll need to make an appointment. He's fully booked today." As they spoke, Richard noticed a white man in a golf shirt and khakis walk in. The receptionist immediately brightened, greeting him by name. Within 30 seconds, the bank manager, Mr. Thomas, himself emerged from his office to shake the man's hand and escort him inside. The contrast was so stark that Richard almost laughed. "Almost. Can see Mr. Thomas is available for some clients," Richard observed quietly. Peterson flushed slightly. "That's a pre-arranged meeting." "I see," Richard said. He took out his phone and pulled up his banking app, showing years of transaction history with Westbrook. "Perhaps you could verify my identity and account status through your system? This transfer needs to happen today." Peterson hesitated, then with obvious reluctance moved to a computer terminal. After a few keystrokes, his expression changed slightly as he saw the account balances and transaction history. "Still," Peterson insisted, "for transactions over a certain amount, we require scheduled appointments with Mr. Thomas, bank. Policy for security purposes." Richard, watched as another client, a white woman in a casual business outfit, was greeted warmly by staff and escorted directly to a desk without question. "That's a new policy," Richard said. "I processed a similar transfer just last month without any appointment." "Well, policies change," Peterson replied, sliding Richard's premium card back across the counter. If you'd like to make an appointment for later this week, the transfer needs to happen today, Richard repeated, his voice still calm but now carrying the quiet authority that had helped him navigate boardrooms and investment meetings for years. Is there someone else who can assist me? This level of service is not what I've come to expect from Westbrook. Peterson's face hardened. Sir, I've explained our policy. Without an appointment with Mr. Thomas, we cannot process your transaction today. You'll need to come back another time. There are other clients waiting. Richard glanced around the nearly empty lobby. The only waiting clients were already being helped. He could push further, ask for the branch manager, make a scene. But 15 years of business had taught him when to recognize a wall that wouldn't move today. I understand, Richard said finally, tucking his ID back into his wallet. Thank you for your time. As he turned to leave, he heard Peterson mutter something that sounded remarkably like, "These people always expect special treatment." Outside in the warmth of the morning sun, Richard paused on the steps of Westbrook Financial. The interaction had left a familiar bitter taste, one he'd hoped his success had finally put behind him. He loosened his tie slightly and took a deep breath. Then he took out his phone and made a call. "David," he said when his financial advisor answered, "I need you to pull together some information on Westbrook Financial. Everything you can get. Stock performance, leadership structure, major shareholders, recent financial reports. And I need it by tomorrow morning." "Problems with the transfer?" David asked. "No," Richard replied, looking back at the gleaming bank building. "But I think it's time for a new investment opportunity. One that might teach a valuable lesson about judging people by their appearance rather than their worth." As he walked to his car, Richard felt the humiliation of the encounter beginning to transform into something else: determination. In his journey from a small startup to a major tech company, he'd faced countless closed doors and subtle dismissals. And every time he'd found a way to turn obstacles into opportunities. This time would be no different. Westbrook Financial had just made a very expensive mistake. The next morning, Richard sat in his corner office overlooking the city skyline. The wall-to-wall windows usually offered him a sense of accomplishment, a visual reminder of how far he'd come from coding in his garage. Today, though, his attention was fixed on the stack of documents his financial advisor, David, had delivered. "That was fast," Richard said, flipping through the preliminary report on Westbrook Financial. David, a sharp-minded man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, sat across from him. "When you call with that tone in your voice, I know it's important. What happened at the bank?" Richard recounted the previous day's experience, keeping his voice level despite the lingering frustration. "Classic case of banking while black," David said, shaking his head. "I've been there myself." "It's 2025, Richard said. "I thought we were past this, at least at the places where I've kept millions in business accounts for over a decade." "Unfortunately not," David replied. "But I'm curious about why you wanted all this information on Westbrook. Planning to move your accounts? Because I can recommend several banks with better track records on diversity." Richard leaned back in his chair, fingers forming a steeple. "I'm considering a more direct approach. What did you find?" David opened his laptop. "Westbrook Financial isn't doing as well as they'd like people to think. They've been losing market share to online banks for the past 3 years. Their technology is outdated. They're still running systems from 2018, practically dinosaurs in the banking world." Richard nodded. As a tech CEO, he knew how quickly digital infrastructure became obsolete. "Their customer satisfaction scores have been declining steadily," David continued, turning the laptop to show Richard a downward trending graph, particularly among younger clients and minority business owners. "There have been several complaints filed about discriminatory practices, but nothing that's made headlines yet." "Who owns them?" Richard asked. "That's where it gets interesting. Westbrook is regional, not one of the national giants. About 40% is held by the Westbrook Family Trust, old money from the 1950s. Another 30% is split among various investment groups. The remaining 30% is publicly traded but thinly. Their stock has dropped 15% in the last year alone." Richard stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. What would it take to acquire a controlling interest? David's eyebrows shot up. "You're not thinking—" "I'm always thinking, David. That's how Vision Technologies became what it is today." Richard turned back to face his advisor. "Would it be possible David ran a hand through his hair, already calculating. Theoretically, yes. You'd need to convince some of those investment groups to sell and pick up the available public shares. But Richard, buying a bank is a completely different game from software. Different regulations, different risks, different opportunities, Richard countered. Our company has the technology that banks like Westbrook desperately need to survive the next decade. And clearly they need a cultural overhaul as well. David began typing rapidly. The Westbrook Family Trust would never sell to you, especially if they caught wind of why you're interested. Then we make sure they don't catch wind of it, Richard said. At least not until it's too late. Over the next week, Richard assembled a small, trusted team. David to handle the financial aspects, his chief legal counsel, Lisa, to navigate banking regulations, and his VP of research, Anthony, to dig deeper into Westbrook's operations and vulnerabilities. They gathered in Richard's private conference room, the city lights twinkling below as evening fell. The walls were covered with charts, financial projections, and printouts of Westbrook's organizational structure. We've identified the weak points, Anthony said, pointing to a display showing Westbrook's declining quarterly results. Their mobile banking platform is practically unusable. They're losing young customers at twice the industry rate, and their business banking services, which should be their bread and butter, are falling behind competitors. Lisa, adjusting her glasses, added, I've been discreetly reviewing the discrimination complaints filed against them. There's a pattern here, not just one bad manager or one bad branch. It's systemic, and it's a serious legal liability they don't seem to be addressing. Richard listened intently, making notes on his tablet. What about their shareholders? Any dissatisfaction there? David nodded vigorously. The investment groups are getting nervous. I've had some unofficial conversations, posing as a market researcher. 3 of the 5 major groups are considering reducing their positions if the next quarterly report doesn't show improvement. And will it? Richard asked. Anthony shook his head. Not a chance. I've seen their preliminary numbers through some industry contacts. They're going to miss projections again. Richard stood up, walking slowly around the room, examining each chart and report. His team waited, recognizing his process when making major decisions. Here's what we're going to do, he finally said. First, we create an investment vehicle separate from Vision Technologies, something that won't immediately connect back to me. David, can you set that up? Already working on it, David replied. I can have Horizon Holdings incorporated by next week. On paper, it'll appear to be a diverse investment group with interests in multiple sectors. Good. Second, we begin quietly purchasing available public shares, but not enough to trigger reporting requirements. We don't want to drive up the price prematurely. Lisa made a note. I'll monitor the regulatory thresholds. Third, Richard continued, after their quarterly report drops and the stock takes another hit, we approach the investment groups. We don't offer to buy them out completely. That would raise too many questions. Instead, we suggest a partnership to revitalize Westbrook with new technology and leadership. And once we have agreements in principle, Anthony asked, then we move quickly, Richard said. We consolidate enough shares to gain effective control, even without the family trust. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be a done deal. The team worked late into the night refining the strategy, identifying potential obstacles, and developing contingency plans. As the others packed up to leave, Richard remained at the window looking out at the city. David paused at the door. This is going to be expensive, time-consuming, and risky. You realize that, right? All because one bank manager was a prejudiced jerk. Richard turned, his expression resolute. It's not about one bank manager, David. It's about changing a system. How many other people has Westbrook treated the same way? People who don't have the resources to do anything about it? He walked back to the table, looking at the photo of Westbrook's executive leadership team. All white faces, mostly male, mostly over 60. Besides, he added with a slight smile, from a purely business perspective, Westbrook is undervalued. With our technology and a genuine commitment to serving all communities, we could transform it into something extraordinary. David nodded slowly. Fair enough. I'll start making the arrangements tomorrow. After David left, Richard sat alone in the conference room. On his tablet, he pulled up the website for Westbrook Financial, with its empty promises of banking for all and community first, splashed across smiling stock photos. Time for some truth in advertising, he murmured to himself. The following day, Richard transferred his business accounts to another bank, the transaction that Westbrook had refused to help him with. As he signed the paperwork, the new bank manager couldn't hide her surprise at the size of the accounts they were acquiring. "May I ask why you're leaving Westbrook after so many years?" she inquired politely. Richard smiled. "Let's just say I'm planning a different kind of relationship with them, one that's going to be educational for everyone involved." The next 4 weeks passed in a whirlwind of careful planning and strategic moves. Richard maintained his regular schedule at Vision Technologies, making sure nothing appeared out of the ordinary to industry observers or his wider team. But his evenings and early mornings were dedicated to what his inner circle had begun calling Project Westbrook. Horizon Holdings, the investment vehicle David had created, began quietly purchasing available Westbrook Financial shares on the open market. They were careful to stay just under the reporting thresholds that would trigger public disclosure. As predicted, Westbrook's quarterly report was disappointing. Their stock dropped another 8% in a single day. The financial press barely noticed. A small regional bank struggling wasn't headline news. But for Richard and his team, it was the opportunity they'd been waiting for. "Time for phase 2, Richard said during their dawn meeting in his home office. The early morning light cast long shadows across the room as his team gathered around a digital display showing Westbrook's latest stock performance. "I've arranged meetings with representatives from 3 of the investment groups next week," David reported. "They think we're a technology investment firm interested in helping Westbrook modernize their digital infrastructure." "Which isn't entirely untrue," Richard pointed out. "Just not the whole truth," Lisa added with a slight smile. She'd been skeptical at first, but as they dug deeper into Westbrook's practices, her legal mind had become increasingly troubled by what they found. "I've completed the regulatory review. If we structure the deal as planned, we shouldn't face any major hurdles from the banking authorities." Anthony slid a tablet across the table to Richard. "You should see this. I've been monitoring their internal communications through some industry contacts." Richard scrolled through the document, his expression darkening. "They're planning to close branches in 3 predominantly black neighborhoods. Cost-cutting measures, they're calling it," Anthony confirmed. "Meanwhile, they're renovating their branches in the wealthiest, whitest suburbs." Richard set the tablet down carefully. What had begun as a response to personal humiliation had evolved into something more meaningful. The discriminatory incident he'd experienced wasn't isolated. It was part of a pattern that affected entire communities. "We need to move faster," he decided. "David, push those meetings up if possible. Lisa, have the final acquisition documents ready to go. Anthony, prepare a complete technology overhaul plan that we can implement immediately after taking control." The team nodded, energized by Richard's intensity. "One more thing," Richard added. "I want to know everything about the branch manager who refused me service. Not for retribution, but because I want to understand how a bank builds a culture where that kind of behavior is acceptable." The following week, Richard found himself in the first of 3 pivotal meetings. The setting was deliberately neutral, a private dining room at an upscale restaurant downtown, not Vision Technologies' offices. Richard had carefully chosen his appearance, a well-made but not flashy suit, minimal jewelry, nothing that would trigger the unconscious biases he knew existed in the financial world. Across the table sat Gerald Winston, representing one of Westbrook's largest investment group shareholders. He was a shrewd-looking man in his 60s, clearly used to being the most powerful person in any room. "Mr. Winston, thank you for meeting with me," Richard began. "I understand your group has a significant position in Westbrook Financial." Winston nodded cautiously. "We do. Though I must say, it hasn't been our most successful investment in recent years." "That's precisely why I wanted to meet," Richard said, opening a sleek presentation folder. "Horizon Holdings specializes in revitalizing traditional institutions with modern technology and fresh perspectives." Over the next hour, Richard laid out a vision for Westbrook that was genuinely compelling. Advanced mobile banking platforms, AI-driven customer service systems, streamlined loan processes that could reduce approval times from weeks to days. He carefully avoided mentioning his personal connection to the bank or his experience there. "This all sounds promising," Winston said when Richard finished. But why Westbrook specific? Ally? There are larger banks that could benefit from these innovations. Richard had anticipated this question. Regional banks like Westbrook have the perfect scale for our approach, large enough to make the investment worthwhile, small enough to implement changes quickly without years of bureaucratic resistance. And frankly, Westbrook's current challenges make it an attractive opportunity. Winston studied him for a long moment. You mean its declining stock price makes it a bargain? Richard smiled. I prefer to think of it as undervalued with significant growth potential. By the time coffee was served, Winston was asking detailed questions about implementation timelines and potential returns. Richard could sense his interest was genuine. Would your group consider a partnership approach? Richard asked carefully. Horizon Holdings would acquire a significant position, but we'd welcome your continued involvement. Your experience in the banking sector would be invaluable during the transition. Winston seemed pleased by this approach. It offered a way to remain involved while reducing exposure to a struggling investment. I'd need to discuss it with my partners, of course. But speaking personally, I find your vision intriguing. As they shook hands at the end of the meeting, Winston asked one final question. I don't believe you mentioned your background before founding Horizon Holdings. Where did you cut your teeth in the financial sector? Richard's answer was smooth and entirely truthful. My expertise is actually in technology. I founded and still run Vision Technologies. Recognition dawned in Winston's eyes. The software company? That's quite impressive. Thank you, Richard replied modestly. I believe banking's future lies at the intersection of finance and technology. Westbrook has the finance part covered. Horizon can bring the technology. What Richard didn't, say what Winston wouldn't discover, until much later, was that Vision Technologies had repeatedly tried to sell its banking software to Westbrook over the years, only to be turned down by executives who couldn't imagine a black-owned tech company having anything valuable to offer their institution. The meetings with the other investment groups followed a similar pattern. By presenting himself as a technology innovator rather than leading with his identity as a black business leader, Richard found doors opening that might otherwise have remained closed. It was a familiar dance, one he'd performed throughout his career, leading with his expertise, allowing his accomplishments to speak first, revealing his full identity only after establishing credibility. 3 weeks later, the financial world was caught by surprise when Horizon Holdings announced it had secured agreements to acquire controlling interest in Westbrook Financial. The business press scrambled to identify the people behind Horizon, with speculation running wild about which technology mogul might be making a move into banking. Richard sat in his office, watching the news coverage with a mixture of satisfaction and sobering reflection. The acquisition had cost him personally nearly $120 million, a significant portion of his wealth, though Vision Technologies remained his primary business. The technology overhaul plan was ready to implement. The regulatory approvals were proceeding without issue. Only one piece of business remained before the deal became final. Are you sure about this? David asked, standing in Richard's doorway with a concerned expression. Richard nodded. Absolutely. Set up the meeting for tomorrow. The next morning, Richard walked through the familiar doors of Westbrook Financial's main branch, the same doors he'd exited in humiliation just months before. This time he wasn't dressed in a business suit but casual Friday attire, dark jeans, a crisp button-down shirt, and a lightweight blazer. At the reception desk, the same young woman who had barely acknowledged him before, he said simply, I have an appointment with Mr. Peterson. Her eyes widened slightly as recognition dawned. Of course, sir. Mr. Peterson is expecting you. As she led him toward the assistant manager's office, Richard noticed the subtle changes in the staff's demeanor. Word had clearly spread about Horizon Holdings' acquisition. Though the identity of its founder remained confidential, William Peterson stood as Richard entered, extending his hand automatically before recognition hit him like a physical force. His face went through a remarkable series of expressions: confusion, shock, dismay, and finally fear. You, he said weakly. Richard smiled, taking the seat across from Peterson's desk without waiting to be invited. Me, he agreed. I believe we have some unfinished business to discuss. William Peterson sank slowly back into his chair, his complexion ashen. I don't understand, he said, though his expression suggested he was beginning to understand all too well. Let me clarify, Richard said calmly. My name is Richard Taylor. I'm the founder and CEO of Vision Technologies. I'm also the founder of Horizon Holdings, which as of this morning owns a controlling interest in Westbrook Financial. He paused, allowing the information to sink in. Your bank. Peterson's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. This is because of what happened that day? You bought an entire bank because of one incident? Richard leaned forward slightly. That one incident was a symptom of a larger problem, Mr. Peterson. After you refused me service, I began looking into Westbrook's practices more broadly. What I found troubled me deeply. From his briefcase, Richard withdrew a folder and placed it on the desk between them. In the past 3 years, Westbrook has denied loans to minority business owners at twice the rate of white owners with identical credit profiles. You've closed branches in diverse neighborhoods while opening new ones in predominantly white areas. Your own internal customer satisfaction surveys show a disturbing pattern of different experiences based on race. Peterson stared at the folder but didn't touch it. Those are confidential company documents. How did you due diligence for a major acquisition? Richard replied simply. When you buy a bank, you get to see everything. The assistant manager's face had moved from shock to a defensive anger. Look, if this is about revenge, this isn't about revenge, Richard interrupted, his voice still measured but carrying an unmistakable authority. If it were, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. I'd have sent a termination notice. That silenced Peterson immediately. I'm here because I want to understand, Richard continued. That day when I came in, was it just you? Were you having a bad day? Or were you following what you understood to be Westbrook's unwritten policies? Peterson looked down at his desk, conflict evident on his face. After a long moment, he spoke. It wasn't just me. We were encouraged to prioritize certain clients, to be extra careful with others. He looked up. But I could have made a different choice. I should have, Richard nodded, appreciating the honesty. Yes, you should have. But systems shape individual behavior, Mr. Peterson. And Westbrook's system is broken. I'm here to fix it. Are you firing me? Peterson asked bluntly. That depends, Richard replied. I'm offering you a choice. You can resign today with a standard severance package, or... He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out another document. You can be part of the solution. Peterson looked confused. What does that mean? Westbrook Financial, soon to be renamed Horizon Community Bank, will be implementing new systems, new technology, and most importantly, new values. We'll need people willing to go through intensive training on equitable banking practices and unconscious bias. People willing to acknowledge past mistakes and commit to doing better. It won't be easy, and not everyone will want to make that journey. Richard slid the document across the desk. This is an outline of our new training program. Every employee from tellers to executives will complete it. Those who embrace it will have a place in the new organization. Those who resist will be invited to seek opportunities elsewhere. Peterson picked up the document hesitantly, scanning its contents. You're not just firing everyone and starting over? That would be simpler, Richard acknowledged. But not necessarily better. People can change, Mr. Peterson. Institutions can change. But only if they're willing to confront uncomfortable truths and commit to doing the hard work of transformation. He stood up to leave. You have until the end of the week to decide which path you'll take. I suggest you read that outline carefully and do some honest self-reflection. As Richard turned to go, Peterson called after him. What about Mr. Thomas, the manager who was too busy to see you that day? Richard paused at the door. I'm having a similar conversation with him this afternoon. The difference is I'm meeting with you first because I saw something in your face that day. A moment of doubt, perhaps even shame. It suggested there might be hope for change. Whether I'm right about that is now up to you. The news of Horizon Holdings' acquisition of Westbrook Financial broke nationwide the following day. Richard had prepared a carefully worded press release that emphasized the technology upgrades and expanded services that would be coming to the bank. There was no mention of the discriminatory incident that had catalyzed the acquisition, but as financial analysts began digging into Richard's background and discovering he was the founder of Vision Technologies, speculation ran wild. By noon, his phone was ringing constantly with requests for interviews. You need to make a public statement, Lisa advised during an emergency meeting in Richard's office. The story is spinny. Out of control. Some are portraying you as a revenge-seeking mogul, others as a crusading hero. Neither is completely accurate. Richard nodded, scrolling through the news coverage on his tablet. Schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning. Just a small one here at Vision headquarters. No more than 20 reporters. The next morning, Richard stood before a room of journalists, cameras flashing as he stepped up to the podium. He was dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit that projected both authority and approachability. "Good morning," he began. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I'd like to make a brief statement about Horizon Holdings' acquisition of Westbrook Financial, and then I'll take a few questions." The room fell silent, everyone eager to hear the story behind what was being called the most interesting bank acquisition of the decade. Financial institutions are the backbone of opportunity in America, Richard began. They determine who can buy homes, who can start businesses, who can invest in education and build generational wealth. When these institutions fail to serve all communities equally, they become obstacles to progress rather than enablers of it. He paused, making eye contact with several reporters before continuing. Horizon Holdings was created with a specific vision to transform banking through technology and inclusivity. Our acquisition of Westbrook Financial represents a commitment to building a banking institution that truly serves all communities with equal respect and opportunity. Reporter from the Wall Street Journal raised his hand. "Mr. Taylor, isn't it true that you were personally refused service at Westbrook shortly before initiating this acquisition? Isn't this really about revenge?" Richard smiled slightly. "I've had both positive and negative experiences with various banks throughout my career. What matters isn't any single interaction, but the patterns that emerge when you look at an institution's practices over time. Our detailed analysis of Westbrook revealed a bank with excellent potential, but significant room for improvement in both technology and service equity." Another reporter jumped in. "Will you be firing the staff members who allegedly discriminated against you? Horizon Community Bank, our new name moving forward, will be implementing comprehensive training programs for all staff," Richard replied diplomatically. "We believe in giving people the opportunity to grow and change. Those who embrace our new direction will thrive with us. Those who prefer not to will naturally seek opportunities elsewhere." The questions continued for nearly an hour, with Richard skillfully navigating the more provocative ones while emphasizing his vision for the bank's future. By the time the press conference ended, the narrative was beginning to shift from revenge takeover to visionary transformation. As the last journalists filed out, David approached Richard with an impressed expression. "You didn't mention the incident once." "Not directly." Richard straightened his tie. "Some things don't need to be said out loud to be understood. Besides, this hasn't been about that one moment for a long time now." He gathered his notes from the podium. "This is about creating lasting change, and that work is just beginning." Back in his office, Richard found a message waiting from an unexpected source. William Peterson, the assistant manager who had refused him service, had sent an email. "I've spent the past 24 hours thinking about our conversation and reading the training materials you provided," the message began. "I won't pretend it was comfortable. It wasn't, but it was necessary. If you're serious about giving people a chance to be part of the solution, I'd like to accept that opportunity. I have a lot to learn, but I'm willing to do the work." Richard read the message twice before forwarding it to his HR director with a note. "Let's give him that chance." One by one, most of Westbrook's employees made similar choices. Some left, including Mr. Thomas, who resigned rather than participate in the training program. But the majority stayed, curious about the bank's new direction and their place in it. As Richard drove home that evening, he thought about how differently things might have gone if Peterson had simply treated him with respect that day at the bank. A small act of basic courtesy would have saved everyone considerable trouble. But then again, countless customers would have continued experiencing discrimination at Westbrook. Sometimes, Richard reflected, it takes a dramatic catalyst to create meaningful change. In a strange way, Peterson's poor judgment that day might ultimately benefit thousands of banking customers who would otherwise have continued facing subtle barriers and diminished service. Not a bad outcome for a humiliating morning, Richard murmured to himself as he pulled into his driveway. Tomorrow would bring a new phase of the journey, the actual transformation of Westbrook into Horizon Community Bank. There would be resistance, setbacks, and challenges along the way. But Richard had built his technology company from nothing. He knew how to transform a vision into reality, and this vision was worth fighting for. 1 year later, Richard stood in the lobby of what had once been Westbrook Financial's main branch. The physical transformation was striking. Gone were the intimidating marble counters and closed office doors. The redesigned space featured open consultation areas, comfortable seating, and digital displays explaining banking services in multiple languages. But the changes went far deeper than mere aesthetics. Our small business loan approvals are up 47% overall, with the biggest gains among minority-owned businesses, reported Alicia Chen, the new branch manager. She had been a mid-level employee at Westbrook who embraced Richard's vision and quickly rose through the ranks. And our customer satisfaction scores have never been higher. Richard nodded approvingly as they walked through the busy branch. Customers of all backgrounds were being helped by a visibly diverse staff. The technology upgrades had eliminated many of the pain points in traditional banking: long waits, excessive paperwork, opaque decision-making processes. "And Peterson?" Richard asked quietly. Alicia's expression was thoughtful. He struggled at first. The training sessions were tough for him, lots of uncomfortable realizations. But he stuck with it. He's actually become one of our strongest advocates for the new approach. He's managing our West Side branch now, in one of the neighborhoods Westbrook had planned to abandon. They continued their tour, stopping occasionally to chat with customers and staff. What had begun as a response to humiliation had evolved into something much more significant, a model for what equitable banking could look like. Later that afternoon, Richard hosted a small gathering in the bank's community room to mark the 1-year anniversary of the acquisition. Employees, community leaders, and key business partners mingled over refreshments. "Quite a change from a year ago," David commented, joining Richard near the windows. "More than I expected," Richard admitted. "Banking is a conservative industry. I thought we'd face more resistance." "Oh, there was resistance," David reminded him. "Remember the Westbrook Family Trust trying to block the acquisition? Or the executives who quit rather than implement the new policies?" Richard smiled. "Fair point, but look where we are now." Where they were was impressive indeed. In 12 months, Horizon Community Bank had expanded its customer base by 22%, with particularly strong growth among small businesses, first-time homebuyers, and communities traditionally underserved by the banking industry. The technology innovations developed by Vision Technologies had streamlined operations, cutting costs while improving service. As Richard surveyed the room, he noticed a familiar face among the guests: William Peterson, now looking considerably more comfortable in his role than he had a year ago. After a moment's hesitation, Richard made his way over to him. "Mr. Peterson," he greeted, extending his hand. Peterson shook it firmly. "Mr. Taylor, congratulations on a successful first year. I understand your branch is performing exceptionally well," Richard said. "It is," Peterson acknowledged, "though I can't take all the credit. The new systems make it easier to say yes to customers who deserve opportunities." He paused, looking somewhat uncomfortable. "I've wanted to say something to you for a while now. That day when I treated you so poorly. I've thought about it 1,000 times." Richard waited, letting the man find his words. "I'd like to say it was just a bad day or a misunderstanding," Peterson continued. "But it wasn't. It was bias, plain and simple. I made assumptions based on how you looked, not who you were." He met Richard's gaze directly. "I was wrong. And I'm sorry." "Thank you for saying that," Richard replied simply. "It couldn't have been easy." Peterson gave a rueful laugh. "Nothing about this past year has been easy. But necessary. Absolutely." He glanced around the room. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm proud to work here now. We're actually helping people. All people." As Peterson moved away to greet another colleague, Lisa approached Richard with a tablet in hand. "The quarterly numbers just came in," she announced. "We're up 8% over projections. The board is going to be very happy." "The numbers are important," Richard acknowledged, "but they're not the whole story." He gestured toward a young couple sitting with a bank advisor nearby. They were reviewing documents for what appeared to be their first home loan, their expressions a mixture of nervousness and excitement. "That's the whole story," Richard said. "People getting fair access to financial opportunities, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. Lisa smiled. When you put it that way, it makes all those late nights working on the acquisition worth it. As the afternoon event wound down, Richard found himself back in the main lobby. A few customers were still being helped, unaware that the bank's owner was standing quietly observing the interactions. Each engagement he witnessed was respectful, helpful, and efficient, banking as it should be. Richard's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Anthony, his VP of Research. Wall Street Journal wants to do a feature on Horizon's first year. They're calling it Banking's New Blueprint. Interested? Richard typed back and set it up. But make sure they talk to our customers too. Their stories matter more than mine. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and took one final look around the transformed space. The journey from that humiliating morning to this moment had been challenging, expensive, and at times exhausting. But standing here now, seeing the concrete results of that journey, Richard felt a deep satisfaction. His thoughts were interrupted by an elderly gentleman who approached him hesitantly. "Excuse me," the man said. "Are you in charge here?" Richard smiled. "In a manner of speaking. How can I help you?" "I just wanted to say thank you," the man continued. "I've been banking in this neighborhood for 40 years. Never felt welcome in the old place. Always felt like I was being judged. But now," he gestured around the open, welcoming space, "now I feel respected. Makes a difference, you know?" "I do know," Richard replied, the simple exchange affecting him more deeply than any business metric could. "It makes all the difference in the world." After the man walked away, Richard stood for a moment in quiet reflection. What had started as a response to personal disrespect had grown into something that was changing lives and setting new standards for an entire industry. Other banks were already beginning to take notice, with several reaching out to learn more about Horizon's approach to technology and inclusive service. The transformation wasn't complete. Changing deep-rooted institutional practices takes more than a year. There would be more challenges ahead, more resistance to overcome, more systems to reimagine, but the foundation had been laid for something truly meaningful. As Richard left the bank that evening, he paused on the same steps where he had stood a year earlier, humiliated and angry after being refused service. That day he had made a call that set this entire journey in motion. Today he made another call, this one to his mother. "Hey Mom," he said when she answered. "Remember that story you always told me? About how you could never get a home loan as a single black woman in the 1980s, until you brought along your white coworker to co-sign?" "Of course I remember," she replied. "Why do you ask?" "I think you should come visit my bank," Richard said, looking back at the Horizon Community Bank sign glowing in the evening light. "I think you'd like to see what we're building here." "Your bank," his mother repeated, her voice a mixture of surprise and pride. "I still can't believe you bought a whole bank." Richard smiled. "Sometimes, Mom, the best response to disrespect isn't just walking away. Sometimes it's coming back stronger and changing the game for everyone." As he drove away from the bank, Richard reflected on the journey of the past year. The acquisition had cost him millions and countless hours of work. Was it worth it? The faces of the customers he'd seen today, people receiving respect and fair treatment where once they might have encountered barriers, provided the answer. Some might call what he'd done excessive, buying an entire bank because of one discriminatory incident. But Richard knew it had never really been about just that one moment. It had been about addressing a system that produced such moments for people without the resources to fight back. And in that sense, it might have been the best investment he'd ever made.